Well, the key element for me for tax reform is that it hit everybody evenly across the board, and that we don't have a segment of the population that we just say, well, no, you guys don't have to pay, but you do get to say how much the other people pay. That doesn't make any sense. And other thing that doesn't make any sense is people who can afford fancy tax lawyers and accountants get away with everything. So the system that I want eliminates those two extremes. I personally like the idea of a flat tax that can be imposed at the point of sale and can be done automatically so that people don't have to file income tax returns. And it's the same for everybody across the board. I think it would probably end up being, we've been working with some economists, it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 15% across the board for all transactions. In the beginning, it would be probably closer to 15%. As we get things under control, it would come down, and eventually it probably would be less than 10%. I personally think that it would be very nice to add on to something like that a luxury tax of about 5% on things that are extremely expensive. And basically what that will do is it will allow the rich to pay off our national debt, because that money would only go to pay the national debt. And that gets rid of a lot of the grumbling that people will have about that. And once the national debt is paid off, we eliminate that one as well.
I read about and then later saw the remarks you made at the National Freedom Breakfast, and you had President Obama and Vice President Biden in the audience. It just struck me, what in the world was going through your mind that gave you the courage to stand there and make the comments you made, knowing who was sitting there in the audience?
Knowing that I would get an IRS audit. Well, first of all, I knew that all my financial stuff was in order. But in Romans 8, it says, if God be for you, who can be against you? And so I'm not afraid of him or anybody else, quite frankly, recognizing who is in charge. But also recognizing that our nation is going off the rails. We are losing all the things that people fought for decades and for centuries. And that we are turning into something that was never intended. And it's pretty hard to just sit back and allow that to happen. So, whatever happens to me, we have to get that conversation started, and we have to get people involved in it, and we have to move the ball in a different direction, or we're doomed, and our children are doomed. We don't want to see that happen.
Dr. Carson, commend you for taking on this Herculean task. On Tuesday, we're meeting with a group of the Black grassroots community activists, and I'm from the hardcore part of the Black community, such as yourself. There's hope that is lost. There is vision that is lost. What can we do, or what is your aspect or your concept on how can we get these young people re-identified in who they are and that they can be successful? The Democratic Party has taken so much away from the Black community with entitlements. How are we going to get that concept back that you have to learn to work from the sweat of your brow? You have to fight for what you get. You got to want it to get it, that nobody's going to give you anything. But if you just begin to try, you can make it. How are we going to convey that message back to the Black community?
Oh, it's a very, very good question, because the victim mentality has stolen the integrity and the ethic out of people who have withstood enormous hardships in the past. And I think we have to, first of all, get them reinvested in America. A lot of people have told them, you're not a part of America, you should be more Afrocentric, all this kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, you know, people in this country of African descent have made enormous contributions to this country. People just don't know about it. We need to start making sure that those young people understand that. You know, take them for a walk. You know, and you know, as they're walking out the door, point to their shoes and say, you know, it was Jan Monslager, a black man who invented the automatic shoe lasting machine, which revolutionized the shoe industry throughout the world. And then you walk on that clean street and you tell them it was Charles Brooks, a black man who invented the street sweeper, those machines with big brushes that go down. And you see a big refrigerated tractor trailer truck come down the street, you tell them it was Frederick Jones, a black man who invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes and trains and boats. And it comes to a stop at the red light. You tell them it was Garrett Morgan, a black man who invented the traffic signal. And while you're talking about him, tell how he invented the gas mask, saved lots of lives during the war. And while you're talking about the war, Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarines. And you see a beautiful black woman walking down the street. A black man did not invent her, but you can use that opportunity to talk about Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion. Made it, she was the first woman of any nationality in America to become a millionaire on her own efforts.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you walk past the hospital, you talk about Charles Drew and his contributions to blood banking, understanding the function of blood plasma. Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world, had an operative mortality rate of less than 5%. You look up at the surgical light. Thomas Edison, you didn't know he was black, did you? He wasn't black.
He should have been.
But his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, was. And you can tell how Lewis Latimer came up with the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days, invented the electric lamp, diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell, was a tremendous inventor in his own right. Most people never heard of him. You'll walk past the railroad tracks. Andrew Beard, the automatic railroad car coupler, spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, the automatic locomotive lubrication engine. In fact, he had so many inventions, when something would come out, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? Most people don't even know that's where the term came from. You know, I mean, and I'm just barely scratching the surface. So, you know, we need to make sure that these young people understand that their ancestors played an important role in the development of this country. They're an important part of this country. But, you know, in a larger sense, all of us need to recognize that we are responsible. We are our brother's keepers.
Yeah.
Okay? And for every one of those young people that we keep from going down a path of self-destruction, it's one less person that we have to be afraid of or protect our families from. One less person we pay for in the penal system or the welfare system. One more tax-paying, productive member of society who may discover a new energy source or the cure for cancer. We can't afford to throw any of those people away, particularly given the fact that we only have 330 million people. China has over 1 billion. India has over 1 billion. We got to get the most out of all of our people. So we need to start investing in our people. And, you know, we invest just like Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize in 2006 for his micro-lending program, raised millions of people out of poverty in Bangladesh and that part of the world. We need to come up with ways that we invest in our people. And our return on investment is moving people from a state of dependency to a state of independence. That will strengthen the fabric of America. That will bring much more unity to us. And that's who we are.
You forgot one person I need to tell them about.
Who's that?
A guy by the name of Ben Carson.
Ben Carson.
Yeah.
Right.
One of my major concerns has been is the rewriting of the history books in our schools. And you speak about, I learned about Booker T. Washington and admired him so when I was in elementary school, back in the dark ages. And so wouldn't we need to also begin to put back in our history books the relevant people, the people that have really made a difference, and the wars, and explain about why they had occurred. My dad has taught me all my life.
Right.
If you don't learn why we have a war, you're going to have another.
That's exactly right.
If you don't learn from past experience, and teach the coming generations those things, you'll repeat that mistake or you'll have that problem again. And some of the problems I think in our society is that the NEA or whoever it is has allowed the history books to be rewritten to promote hatred.
One of the
and
reasons,
division.
That, I don't like the whole Common Core concept. I think education should be local. And because you have a much greater interest in making sure that your kids get educated and get educated the right way. And when we have a national program of education, the temptation for indoctrination is much too great. And that's the last thing we need. And you look at some of these Common Core programs and what they're trying to teach our kids. The Constitution spells out quite specifically what the duties of the government are. And it says everything else inures to the states. It doesn't say anything about education. So, we need to get back to the Constitution the way that it should be done. People have grown inappropriately skeptical of states, because of what happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago with states' rights and Mississippi and all that kind of stuff. You know what? That's the past. We can't let those ghosts haunt us and keep us from letting our Constitution work the way that it's supposed to. The kinds of things that happened in the past were because of ignorance. That kind of ignorance has been obliterated. And we need to be thinking about a completely different thing. We have those who will beat you over the head forever about slavery, about Japanese internment camps, about anything that we ever did that was bad. They never talk about the good stuff. This is the most benign superpower the world has ever known. This is the most generous nation the world has ever known. They never talk about that. They just talk about our mistakes. I don't know of any society anywhere at any time that didn't make mistakes. Not a society that's inhabited by people, because people are not perfect. But we can learn, and that's the sign of intelligence.
I want to say one more thing, ask you. Several years ago, I mentioned in a room of tax lawyers and CPAs, and I said, why would we not have a flat tax? What's the problem with that? Because it was talked about many years ago. And of course, the room went in they had fit because they're looking at their own profession.
Right.
Well, you talk about getting rid of the IRS, which I think is a fabulous idea. And we have a whole, I personally think it's a conflict of interest for lawyers to be making laws, to be honest with you. And I think that's one of the problems with our country today. But you're going to have a lot of lawyers, a lot of CPA. You're going to have as many people against you from that end as you would the present administration.
Understood.
So how would you handle that?
It doesn't matter how many of them there are more of us. And what we have to do is what I ended talking about. Those 93 million, those 30 million, we have to give them a reason to believe that we're not just like all those other politicians. And I think people are certainly beginning to see that I'm not like the other politicians, because I'm not going to be controlled by their silliness. I'm simply not going to do it. This is about us, the American people. It's not about them, the political class, or them, the media.
What about the trillions of dollars of debt? And when the interest rates go up, they are planned to go up this year. How will we handle that, and how would you handle other nations like China beginning to buy us up or have so much debt that they own us?
Well, first of all, recognize that our debt is probably the thing that is most likely to destroy us in the immediate future. We're talking $18 trillion. Now, just to get some idea of how big that number is, if you tried to pay it back at a rate of $10 million a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it would take 5,000 years.
Wow.
Okay, that's what we're talking about. It's accumulating at the rate of $500 million a day. And it's absolutely destroying the prospects of a good future for our children, our grandchildren. We have politicians who sit around and they say, it didn't go up quite as fast as it did last quarter. That's their definition of success? That is absolute absurdity. So, how do we get out of this problem? Well, first of all, recognize our government is so big. If you take the salaries of everybody who made $69,000 and above in 2010, last year we have good stats for it, it comes out to $5.1 trillion. The national budget that year was $3.5 trillion. 60% of everything the middle class and above makes just to run the federal government. That tells you how absurd it is. So, step number one, we need to trim the government. Now, that always creates a big brouhaha because everybody thinks that their little segment is the most important, and yeah, trim everybody else but us. But there's a very logical way to do it: attrition. We have thousands of government employees that retire every year. Do not replace them. Okay? You can simply move people around into critical positions from one place to another. If you do that for about 4 or 5 years, you're down to a reasonable level. That's going to control a tremendous amount of costs right there. The other thing is, you can't cut your way out of this. You have to grow your way out of it. And you're going to grow your way out of it when you have a reasonable tax structure. And when you get rid of the overreaction that we've had in terms of regulating. You know, and when I'm talking about regulating, I'm talking about all kinds of, I'm talking about the Fed too. The Fed has overregulated, to be honest with you. By putting us in this artificial 0% growth rate for loans, what does that actually do? People used to be able to work. They could work in a factory, be a plumber, a gardener, whatever. Put 5 to 10% of your earnings away. You do that for a few decades, and with the interest that you accumulated, you had a very nice next thing to retire on. That doesn't work in this system. That means nothing. And what about the banks? Why would they loan you anything? You want to start a business? Why are they going to loan you something with an interest rate of 1% or less? Well, there's no incentive for them to loan you anything. So those are things that prevent growth in our society. So when I'm talking about regulation, I'm talking about a whole smattering of regulation that are injuring us as a nation. And we need to get rid of those. You talk to small businessmen, and they'll tell you how much more paperwork they have to do. That frequently have to hire somebody extra just to deal with all the regulations that are going on. This is ridiculous. The government was designed to promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not to control every aspect of our lives. And it's up to us to get them out of our lives.
The quality of life of citizens of the United States actually starts at the local level. What partnership do you see federal government and local government to make that happen?
The main thing that the federal government can do is get out of the way. I mean, they need to there is a valid function to the federal government. I'm not one of those people who advocates getting rid of the federal government by any stretch of the imagination. But they don't need to be involved in so many aspects of our lives. Now, when I talk about investing in our fellow citizens, I'm talking about business and industry and Wall Street and churches and community organizations getting together, and because when they do it, personal relationships develop. That makes all the difference in the world. I was, speaking for a group in Tennessee a couple of weeks ago, very well-to-do individuals were adopting boys from inner city homes. Not bringing them home, but adopting them as people that they were interested in, taking care of, taking them to social events, getting to know them, investing in their education. Virtually every one of them who were from single-parent homes, graduating from high school and going on to college and doing things. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about investing in people. And, investing in ways to create, the right kind of daycare so that all of those young girls can finish their education. They can get their GED or their associate's degree or the bachelor's or the master's or their PhD. And they become self-sufficient, and they begin to teach self-sufficiency to their children. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about empowering churches again. We have got to get ministers to be courageous and start talking about what's right and what's wrong again. Because, by not doing that and letting our morals slip, we're destroying many of our young people.
Undercurrent under the surface makes the mainstream get so nervous. It's time for purpose, for news to serve us, not with propaganda they use to hurt